I never sleep with my windows open, no matter how hot it gets outside. It's not even about the heat anymore. It's about something worse, something I can't explain. The thought of leaving that window open makes my skin crawl, as if the air outside carries something waiting to come in. And so, every night, I shut it tight. Some people say it's silly, but they don't know what I know. They haven't lived through what I've lived through. The air conditioner helps a bit. It fills the silence with a constant hum, and that hum keeps my mind from drifting into dark places. You see, silence isn't peaceful for me. It doesn't bring comfort. It feels dangerous, like something is hiding inside it, waiting to creep out when I least expect it. There was a time when I used to enjoy the quiet. It used to calm me down. But now, I hate it. I hate every second of it. It all started when I was a kid, a time when the silence wasn't empty. There were voices in that silence, voices that never left me, even after all these years. Back then, I didn't understand what they were or where they came from. All I knew was that they came from the woods. They were always there, just beyond the trees. And once you've heard them, you never forget. Even now, I still hear them sometimes, whispering in the back of my mind. This fear, the one that keeps my windows closed every night, it's been with me since childhood. And it's not the kind of fear you grow out of. It stays like a scar on your soul, reminding you that some things in this world can't be explained or forgotten. When I was 9, my life wasn't easy. My parents had just divorced, and it felt like my whole world was falling apart. My dad and I moved into an old, quiet apartment on the ground floor of a two-family house. The upstairs was empty, and the neighborhood was silent, surrounded by thick woods that stretched out for miles. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. It was just me, my dad, and Cash, our old Scottish terrier. Cash wasn't a smart dog, but he was loyal, and back then, he was my only friend. I fought hard to keep him. When my parents split, he stayed with us for my sake. He was always by my side, following me everywhere, even into those woods. Those woods became my escape. When the world felt too heavy, I'd run out there with Cash. I played games, built forts, climbed trees, anything to forget how broken everything felt at home. I'd get lost in my own little world out there. But looking back, I know now that those woods were never really safe. Something dark was hiding in them, waiting. And soon, it found me. One afternoon, Cash and I wandered deeper into the forest than ever before. We'd been out there 100 times, but this time felt different. The trees seemed taller, the shadows longer. Before I knew it, we were lost. The sun was already sinking, and panic started to creep in. I tried to stay calm, but I knew we didn't have much time before everything turned pitch black. Then we stumbled upon a strange clearing. Right in the center was a large rock, covered in weird red markings I couldn't read. At first, I thought it was just a place where teenagers hung out. There was graffiti everywhere. But something about it didn't feel right. The carvings on the trees weren't normal. They showed creepy stick figures, but with goat heads, drawn over and over, all the way up the tree trunks. Whoever did it must have been obsessed. That's when I noticed the dolls. They weren't ordinary dolls, they were made from sticks, and their heads were small animal skulls, white and hollow. The air felt heavy, and I had this overwhelming feeling that the dolls were watching me, even though they had no eyes. I should have left right then, but I didn't. Instead, I touched one. The skull fell to the ground and cracked, and the doll unraveled. In that moment, something shifted. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, as if I had crossed a line I wasn't supposed to. Cash started barking like crazy, and it startled me so much I screamed. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. We ran, and we didn't stop until we found our way home. But what we left behind in that clearing didn't stay there. It followed me, and it never let me go. The night after we found the clearing, I woke up to a strange sound drifting through my window. It wasn't wind or animals. It was chanting soft, rhythmic voices coming from deep within the woods. I couldn't understand the words, but the sound was haunting, like a dark song that never ended. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like it was meant to pull me in. I told my dad about it the next morning. He brushed it off, saying it was just some teenagers fooling around. But it didn't stop. Every night, at exactly 11, the chanting started. It went on for hours, stopping only when the first birds began to sing at dawn. I stopped going to the woods after that. Something about the sound felt dangerous, like it wasn't just noise, it was a warning. I begged my dad to listen, but he refused. He said I was imagining things and told me to keep my window closed. But I couldn't. Closing it would mean I wouldn't hear if something or someone was coming. Each night, the chanting got louder, like it was getting closer. Sometimes I thought I could see a faint glow far off in the woods, like a fire burning in the distance. The nights felt longer, heavier, as if something was waiting for me to make a mistake. And soon, I realized that mistake would cost more than just my sleep. It would cost me everything. One night, everything changed. It wasn't just chanting anymore. I woke up to Cash barking wildly at the window. His tail wagged, but his growl was low and angry. Something was out there. I looked through the glass, but the forest was quiet, too quiet. My dad came in, half asleep, annoyed by the dog's noise. He picked Cash up and carried him out of the room, mumbling that nothing was there. As soon as they left, the chanting stopped like someone flipped a switch. That's when fear hit me harder than ever. I wasn't just scared of the chanting anymore. It was the silence that terrified me. It meant they were out there, somewhere in the dark, watching, waiting. The next day, two strange men drove by our house. They were bald, wearing odd sunglasses, and smoking thin cigars. They slowed down when they saw me, smiling like they knew something I didn't. They drove by again, and again. Later that night, I woke up to find my window open. I hadn't opened it. My heart dropped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I saw him. A man wearing the head of a goat like a mask, rotting fur, twisted horns, and lifeless eyes. He stepped toward me, holding a candle in one hand and a knife in the other. A second man whispered in my ear, his breath cold as ice. "Tomorrow night," the goat man said, his voice low and threatening. "You will light this candle, or your loved ones will pay." And just like that, they vanished. I lay in bed, frozen with fear, unable to scream or cry. I knew from that moment on this wasn't just in my head. It was real, and they were coming back. The next morning, everything felt off. I couldn't stop thinking about the goat man's words. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, but it didn't feel like one. That day dragged on, heavy with dread. Every second was filled with the fear that something terrible was about to happen. And it did. I was outside, waiting for my mom to pick me up, when I saw them again, the two men in the black pickup truck. They rolled by slowly, their cold smiles aimed right at me. I tried to ignore it, hoping they'd just leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something I didn't. Later that day, it happened. Cash, my best friend, was hit by a car. I heard my dad shouting from the front yard, and when I ran out, I saw him kneeling over Cash's lifeless body. The sight was too much. My chest felt tight, my hands cold. I couldn't believe it. His goofy, bearded face that had always made me laugh was now frozen in place, gone forever. I knew, deep down, this wasn't an accident. Those men in the truck had done this, and I knew why. They had warned me, and I didn't listen. I hadn't lit the candle like they told me to. And now, Cash was dead because of me. His blood was on my hands, just like they said it would be. That night, I felt something I hadn't before: pure guilt. It clung to me, heavy and suffocating, like a weight I couldn't lift. I couldn't bring Cash back. All I could do was wonder who would be next if I didn't obey. Midnight came faster than I wanted. I knew what I had to do: light the candle and follow their instructions. The memory of Cash haunted me, pushing me to obey. If I didn't, I knew something worse would happen. So, I waited by the clock, every second heavier than the last. When the time came, I grabbed the red candle, slipped outside, and stepped into the cold night. The backyard felt different, like the air itself was alive. My breath hitched as I placed the candle in the wet grass and flicked my dad's lighter. The small flame danced in the dark, but it did nothing to ease the growing fear inside me. I sat down as they instructed, legs crossed, my heart racing in my chest. Then I saw them, eyes glowing from the edge of the woods, moving back and forth, pacing just beyond the reach of the backyard light. They were too high off the ground to be animals, and their breath short, sharp gasps reeked of rot. My whole body tensed, knowing they were watching me, waiting for the darkness to swallow me whole. The only thing keeping them back was the motion sensor light. I knew it wouldn't last long. It was running on a timer. And when that light went out, nothing would stop them. My heart pounded as I stood up, every muscle screaming to run, but I couldn't risk moving too fast. If I did, they would charge. I felt their frustration, their hunger, building with every step I took toward the house. Then, just as I reached the back door, the light clicked off. Darkness wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. And in that moment, I heard it, a scream that wasn't human. I ran, my feet barely touching the ground, desperate to escape whatever was out there. The sound followed me, sharp and wild, until I slammed the door behind me and collapsed inside. I don't remember much after that. When I came to, my parents were there, holding me while I sobbed uncontrollably. They said I was, after that night, things were never the same. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever had hunted me in the dark was gone. But deep down, I knew the truth. The fear didn't leave, it just changed. It sank into every part of me, quiet but constant, like a shadow I couldn't shake. My parents insisted it was all in my head. They said the stress of the divorce had made me imagine things. My dad even joked that the sounds from the woods were just deer or raccoons. But I knew better. Nothing could explain what I had seen or what I still felt. I stopped going near the woods after that. I avoided the window too, but it didn't help. Even in other places, far away from those trees, I could feel it. Sometimes, when everything around me is silent, too silent, I hear them again. Faint chanting, drifting in from nowhere, just like before. Years later, I moved out of that town, thinking I could leave it all behind. But no matter where I go, the memory follows me. The nights are the worst. In the quiet moments, when the world seems still, I can feel them watching. The same presence, the same fear. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear it again, soft chanting from the darkness, as if they're reminding me, they are never really gone. It always starts the same way, a feeling creeping in slowly, like cold air slipping through a crack. At first, you don't notice it. You brush it off as nothing, just your mind playing tricks on you. But then, it lingers. It sticks, wrapping around you so tightly that even breathing feels heavy. And that's when you know something is wrong. Something you can't explain, but it's there. It's hard to put into words, but you just feel it. It's like the air shifts when you're alone, and the silence around you becomes too quiet, as if the world is holding its breath. That's when fear starts to settle deep inside. Not the kind that makes you jump for a second, but the kind that stays with you always in the back of your mind, whispering that something bad is coming. And no matter how hard you try, you can't stop thinking about it. It's not a normal fear either. It's not about losing your keys or missing a call. It's a fear you can't escape, no matter where you go or what you do. You tell yourself it's nothing, over and over again, hoping that if you ignore it long enough, it'll go away. But it doesn't. It never does. I live alone now. It's not what I wanted, but it's how things turned out. I moved into this place hoping for a fresh start, thinking that maybe new walls and new rooms could bury old fears. It's a small house, nothing fancy, just enough for me. The kind of place where the floors creak and the wind finds ways to whisper through the cracks. I told myself it was cozy, a place to finally feel safe. But it never felt that way, not once. I don't get many visitors. My family checks in sometimes, asking if I'm okay. I say yes because that's what they expect to hear. But the truth is, I don't feel okay. The silence inside these walls feels heavier with every passing day. There are moments when I swear I hear footsteps upstairs, even though I know no one's there. And at night, it's worse. The house shifts and groans, and every sound feels deliberate, like the house itself is awake. I keep telling myself it's just the house settling. But there are times when I feel something more, as if I'm not really alone. Like someone or something is here with me, watching, waiting, and that feeling, it's getting stronger. It happened on a quiet night, one of those nights where everything feels too still. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to sleep. That's when I heard a noise I couldn't explain. It wasn't the usual creaks or groans of the house. This was different. It sounded like someone softly tapping on the walls, slow and deliberate, moving from room to room. I sat up, listening closely, hoping it was just in my head. But the sound kept going, steady and real. My heart started pounding, and I felt cold all over. I told myself it could be the pipes, maybe the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was making its way through the house, and it was coming closer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Complete silence. No movement, no sound, just the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I waited, holding my breath, hoping it was over. But I knew better. That was only the beginning. After that night, things only got worse. The strange sounds didn't go away, they became more frequent. Footsteps would echo across the floor when I was the only one home. Lights flickered, but never in a way that seemed random. Doors I knew I had closed would be wide open when I turned around. Every time I tried to ignore it, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, like unseen eyes followed my every move. It wasn't just the house anymore. The air felt heavier, and time seemed to stretch, making the nights unbearable. I started noticing patterns. Things only happened at certain hours, usually late at night. I'd hear soft knocks on the walls around midnight, and the lights would flicker exactly 3 times before going dark. It was as if whatever was here wanted me to know it was watching, waiting, and getting closer. I tried telling myself it was all just in my mind, but it was getting harder to believe that. The signs were everywhere, and with each passing night, the fear became impossible to ignore. I knew something was coming. It was only a matter of time. It finally happened one night, just after midnight. I was in the living room, too restless to sleep, when the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. The air turned ice cold, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Before I could react, the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall and twisted, standing in the corner of the room. It wasn't a person, it was something else, something wrong. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its presence pressing down on me like a weight. It didn't move, but I could sense that it was aware of me, waiting for me to do something, anything. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I backed away slowly. But no matter how far I moved, it felt like the shadow stayed with me, following without moving an inch. Then, as if it had been watching me long enough, it shifted. It stepped forward just once, and that was enough to send me running. I bolted out of the room, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps, knowing I had just come face to face with whatever had been lurking in my house all along. The next morning, I knew I couldn't deal with this on my own. I told a friend what happened, hoping for some kind of advice or at least someone to believe me. But instead, they just gave me that look, the one people give when they think you're imagining things. They told me I was probably just stressed or not sleeping well. I could tell they didn't take me seriously. I didn't stop there. I searched online for similar experiences, looking for answers. I read about houses with spirits, strange shadows, and cursed objects. But instead of feeling relieved, it made things worse. Everything I found only confirmed my fears. Whatever was in my house wasn't going to leave on its own. I even thought about calling a priest or someone who might know how to handle this, but I kept hesitating. What if they didn't believe me either? Or worse, what if they did? I knew that once I asked for help, there would be no going back. And deep down, I feared that nothing I did would be enough to stop what was coming. See, the night I feared finally came. I knew I couldn't run from it anymore. The strange presence had taken over every corner of my life, and I was exhausted from pretending it wasn't real. This time, I decided I wouldn't hide. If it was going to end, it had to end tonight. Around midnight, the lights flickered again, just like before. I stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the same candle I found earlier, hoping it would offer some kind of protection. The air grew colder, and then it appeared, the shadow, darker than the night around it, moving toward me slowly, as if it knew I had nowhere left to go. I couldn't move. My fear pinned me in place, but I knew this was my only chance. With shaking hands, I lit the candle. The small flame wavered, casting strange shadows across the walls. For a moment, the dark figure hesitated, as if the light from the flame bothered it. I didn't know if the candle would keep it away for long, but it gave me just enough time to act. With every bit of strength I had left, I forced myself to speak. I shouted at it, telling it to leave, demanding that it stop haunting me. The shadow shifted, twisted, and then just like that it was gone. The air lifted, and the room returned to stillness. I stood there in the dim candlelight, breathless, unsure if I had won or if this was just a temporary retreat. But at least, for now, it was over. Or so I thought. The house felt different after that night, quieter, almost normal. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without fear gripping my chest. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever had haunted me was finally gone. And for a while, I almost convinced myself it was. I slept with the lights off again, and the nights passed without incident. But fear has a way of staying with you, even when the danger seems to have passed. Every creak in the floorboards makes me tense. Every shadow that shifts in the corner of my eye makes my heart race. Even now, I find myself glancing at the windows, expecting to see something or someone watching from the darkness. It's not over. I know it isn't. Because sometimes, late at night, when everything is still and the world feels too quiet, I sense it again. That same presence, faint but familiar. It's like a whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me that whatever it was, it's not gone, it's just waiting. And I know, deep down, that one day it will return. It started small, just little things that didn't seem like a big deal at first. A door that was open when I knew I had closed it. Lights flickering for no reason, even though the bulbs were new. At first, I thought I was just being careless. I blamed myself. But after a while, it became clear that something else was happening, something I couldn't explain. Then came the feeling, like someone was watching me. It didn't matter where I was, at home, at work, or walking outside. It was always there, just out of sight, like a shadow you can't escape. I'd check over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. Just that strange, heavy presence that made my skin crawl. I told myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was overthinking, making something out of nothing. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a bad day or a random event, it was deliberate. And the worst part, it felt like whatever it was, wasn't just passing through. It was settling in, becoming part of my life. And once it got in, there was no way to shut it out. At first, I tried to carry on with my normal routine, hoping things would go back to the way they were. I went to work, saw a few friends, and kept up with my usual chores. But no matter what I did, that feeling followed me everywhere. It was always there, lurking in the background, making every moment feel off. I didn't tell anyone what was happening, not right away. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. But I started acting different, quieter, more on edge. People noticed. A friend asked if I was okay, and I lied, saying I was just tired. They didn't push, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The worst part was how it changed the way I felt about my own home. It used to be my safe space, where I could relax and feel like myself. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. No matter how much I tried to act like things were normal, nothing felt right anymore. Something had changed, and I knew it wasn't going away. The first real incident happened late at night. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard something strange, a faint shuffling sound, like someone moving slowly across the floor. I stayed still, listening carefully, telling myself it was probably nothing. But the sound didn't stop. It got closer, dragging lightly, as if something or someone was just outside my bedroom door. My heart started pounding. I held my breath, waiting for it to go away, but instead, I heard a soft knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps. My stomach dropped. I knew no one else was in the house. I wanted to get up, to check, but fear kept me frozen. And then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. No more knocks. No more shuffling. Just silence. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the door, too scared to move. I told myself it had to be my imagination, but deep down, I knew that whatever it was real, and it wasn't done with me yet. After that night, things started happening more often. I'd hear footsteps when I was alone or find objects moved from where I left them. It was subtle, at first a chair slightly out of place, lights turning off on their own. But each time, it felt like a message, as if something was making sure I knew it was there. The worst part was how these things followed a pattern. Every night, around the same time, the air would shift heavy and cold, like it was waiting for something to happen. And it wasn't just noises anymore. I'd feel it too, like a presence standing right behind me, close enough to touch but never making a sound. I tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop if I didn't react. But the more I ignored it, the worse it got. Small shadows moved in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. Lights flickered exactly 3 times, always at midnight. And each time I looked, nothing was there. But I could feel it closer every night, pushing deeper into my life, waiting for the moment I couldn't pretend it wasn't real anymore. I knew I couldn't keep brushing this off, so I started looking for answers. I searched through old records about the house, hoping to find anything that could explain what was happening. That's when I found it. Buried in an old news article, I read about a strange death that had taken place here years ago. A man had been found in the house, lifeless, with no signs of injury. The only thing left behind was a strange symbol drawn on the floor beside him. The article described it as a ritual marking, though no one knew what it meant. The case had gone cold, labeled an accident or some unexplained tragedy. But as soon as I saw the symbol, I felt the same chill run through me, the same cold presence that filled my home at night. It all started to make sense, in the worst way possible. This wasn't just a haunting. Whatever was in the house wasn't random. It had been here before, and now it was back. And if that symbol meant anything, it wasn't here to scare me. It was here to finish what had been started. I knew I had to get out. I packed a bag and left the house, thinking if I stayed somewhere else for a while, it would leave me alone. But no matter where I went, the feeling followed. It was like the presence had attached itself to me, waiting quietly, always one step behind. Even in crowded places, I felt isolated, like it was closing in. I tried reaching out for help, telling a friend about the strange things that had been happening. They listened, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. "You're just stressed," they said. "It'll pass." But I knew it wouldn't. I tried to stay with them for a night, hoping it would make a difference. It didn't. The moment I stepped back into that house, it was as if everything I did to escape was erased. The air felt heavier than ever, and the lights flickered again 3 times, right on cue. That's when I realized I couldn't run from it. It wouldn't let me leave. If I wanted this to end, I would have to face it, one way or another. The night I decided to face it, everything felt different. The house was too quiet, as if it knew what I was about to do. I sat in the living room, gripping the same lighter I had carried with me since I moved in. Midnight came, and right on time, the lights flickered 3 times, leaving me in darkness. Then I saw it, the same shadow, but this time it didn't stay in the corner. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate, growing larger with every step. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But I knew this was it. There was no more running. I struck the lighter, and the small flame lit up the room. The shadow stopped, hovering just beyond the edge of the light, like it couldn't reach me as long as the flame burned. My hand shook, but I held it steady, forcing myself to stay still. I whispered, "You don't belong here." It was all I could manage, but as soon as the words left my mouth, the shadow twisted violently, as if the light was burning it. For a moment, I thought I saw something beneath the darkness, something human, but not quite. And then, with one final flicker, it was gone, leaving nothing but silence behind. I sat there for what felt like hours, the lighter still burning in my hand, until I finally realized whatever it was, I had forced it back. At least for now. The days after felt strange to normal, almost like nothing had happened. The house was quiet again, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without feeling watched. I wanted to believe it was over, that I had finally chased it away. But deep down, I knew better. Things like this don't just disappear, they wait. I went back to my routine, trying to convince myself life could be normal again. But small things still bothered me, the way the air felt heavy in certain rooms, or how the shadows lingered just a little too long in the corners. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me on edge. Some nights, just before sleep, I still feel it, a flicker of cold, a shift in the dark. It's faint, almost like a distant memory, but it's there. I know it's waiting, watching from somewhere just beyond my reach. And though the house feels quiet now, I can't shake the feeling that one day it will come back. And next time, it might not leave so easily.